Welcome to the CTSI Boot Camp. Today's presentation, Best Practices for Developing and Conducting Survey Research Methods, is the third of our fall series on blending qualitative and quantitative methods in health research. Our presenter today is Dr. Lesley Cottrell. Dr. Cottrell is a developmental psychologist and the Vice Chair of Research for Pediatrics at WVU. She is the director of the Center for Excellence in Disabilities and an investigator with the West Virginia Prevention Research Center. Her research examines health decision-making of children and adolescents and the parental influences on those decisions. Over the past 15 years, Dr. Cottrell has conducted federally funded research working with children and families in West Virginia, national samples and international samples of families from China and the Caribbean. Much of this work has included survey research design methods.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I'm just going to move this back because I will fall over it. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Okay. All right. So survey research is something that I've done for many, many years, and I've learned along the way. Now, 15, 20 years into it, does that mean that I'm not building surveys that aren't, that are perfect and have every component I ever wanted it by the end of it? No, not by any means. There is always, at the end of a research study, I wish it was worded, an item was worded a little bit differently. I should have assessed this. This design should have been a little bit different. So I don't want to pass some gloom and doom, but there's always a lifelong learner when it comes to surveys. Now, given the time, there's a little bit of a Halloween, there's a little bit of politics, and sometimes they are the same. So I've tried to mix that into the presentation. Hopefully it's funny, but it mixes up our brain. Okay, so why should we care about survey research? Here's an example of the politics, right? How many times have you heard the latest poll says blah, 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 right? Fill in the blank. That's a survey. That's a survey being done. It's a survey being done either by computer, telephone. We're going to talk about all those different methods. Why should we care? Because it's in our everyday lives, sometimes too much. But we're consumers of that information, and we want to be able to critically analyze how that survey is constructed, how it's implemented, and whether that data, just like any other type of method, whether those findings at the end of it are representative of us, of the sample that they say they took, and whether they're accurate and valid, right? So that's why we should care, because we're consuming it every day in media and otherwise, and we need to be knowledgeable about this. This down here, so of course everyone knows these people over here, our current presidential candidates. Down here, so Truman shows this interesting newspaper that Dewey wins the presidency, right? Because the polls, the way they surveyed the polls during election night, they say, and even so much confidence that the newspaper printed on the front page that someone else got the presidency. Okay, so it can cause some interesting issues. All right, so today, what are we going to specifically talk about survey research? So hopefully by the end of this, you're going to understand what are the individual components of survey research? What should we be mindful of? What are the types of surveys? And there are many, okay? Design issues. Just like any great research presentation, you talk about certain designs. Some that are great, some that are not so great, and you know what? It depends on your research question and your audience, and I'm going to say that several times today. Okay, are they reliable and valid? We're going to talk about that. I want you to leave here today paying attention to particular items, and if they're biased in any way, if the response options cover everything that you would need for like a range of responses. Do they have double negatives? You would be amazed at how many items have double negatives, and you're like, I don't know if there's a good way to answer this. I want you to be cognizant of what you read. Okay. So what do surveys measure? Some people think survey research really is limited. Now, I'm biased. I should have a conflict of interest or a disclosure slide on here because I do it, right? If I wouldn't do it if I didn't think it was valuable. So survey research, I think, can give us a lot of information about a lot of different things. So all of these are some. Behaviors, you compare a survey with an objective piece, a measurable, we use Fitbits, right? Measuring physical activity. But we can also survey parents and say, how often does your child engage in all of these activities? Okay? Attitudes, beliefs, so cognitions that are matched to behaviors that we may or may not be able to observe. Well, MRIs, EEGs, things of that sort, PET scans, we could match them with that as well now. Outcomes of interest. So these are other behaviors. So I've spoken of physical activity. Fill in the blank for an outcome of interest, and you could assess it with a survey, in my opinion. And then the factors associated with that. So, you know, in the introduction, it was my interest has been child and adolescent health decision making, and that has been adolescent risk behaviors. It's been related to obesity outcomes. It's been related to other negative health outcomes that kids now face. Factors that contribute to that might be physical activity, what they eat, how the school day is structured, and a lot of those things can be assessed through surveys. Our approach to things, the processes that we think about when we do anything can be assessed through a survey. Challenges and solutions can also be assessed. So I think it's a pretty nifty thing. All right, so back to politics as an example. Okay, here's from the Pew Research about well, they do more than politics, but that's much of their website. So here's some things that they currently have on their websites. So if you want to look at anything related to voting, right, this one is changing demographic profiles of the Republican and Democratic voters. So they surveyed voters. They categorized them based on Democratic, Republican in this sense, and they looked at some demographics, okay? And then later they have a story in here about how those are changing. People are switching parties. And who are those people based on demographics? Are there certain people that are changing? And let's get to know them a little bit more. Okay, so this is how the Pew Research Center, and they go through, they have a pretty decent explanation of all of their survey methodology. It's really impressive. Okay, then you have, so you have things like that, like are we Republican, are we Democrat, are we independent, you know, all that, and then we look at the factors associated with our voting patterns. And so all those up at the top, maybe it relates to, our choices relate to immigration, health care. Maybe there's certain things that are influencing our overall outcomes, our overall beliefs about candidates. So at the top, these are just some factors that they also studied and they have looked at to understand voting patterns and planning. And then, of course, I added this because just we see it. We've seen it so many times, political opinions. The other one that I really liked was I've really worked on my Christmas list by posting my political opinions because it shortens. So yeah, you can get funny. And then here are just some more stories, some more studies that they've looked at. Again, some are demographic influences on a behavior or an attitude, a viewpoint. They've talked about oversampling to study small groups, so their own methodology in this. All right, the whole issue about the election process might having a lot of problems. They've looked at those things. What are the factors leading to that? So surveys are being done a lot. And the Pew Research Center also, the other areas, they tend to be the highly sensitive areas. Like there's a huge religion section. There's a huge, you know, so they really get into interesting areas and a lot of work in that sense. Okay. Problems. Survey research, though, so it has the potential to do all kinds of things. It can be used incorrectly, and if it's used incorrectly, it can be an awful thing to use or an awful thing to have in one's toolkit. So when we do it, we need to do it right. One of the problems whether you are developing a survey, and right off the bat I would tell you, anytime that you do not have to develop a survey from scratch, don't develop it from scratch. And that's not out of laziness. It's because someone has taken the time, and you'll see this process as it unfolds in this presentation, that if you do it right, there is a pretty intensive process. If someone's already done that, and that existing survey suits your purposes, use it. It's a valid, reliable survey. Use it. If not, it is a-okay to develop your survey. Okay? The next question would be, can you slightly modify an existing survey? And that's where you get a little gray area. How much are you modifying it? If you're changing several items, you're essentially changing the existing survey. Okay? And that's okay too, but just keep those things in mind. But you want to think, what in that process, is the survey necessary? Is that survey that you're looking at or you're thinking about necessary? What is the purpose of that survey with regard to your entire plans? Okay? Can the data that you want to answer, again, your research question is going to drive this. Go back on your survey, especially if you've developed it, and make sure that it's going to assess your research question. You'll be amazed at how many people at the end cannot answer their original research question. They might answer pieces, but not the overall. You don't want to be in that space. And then what level of detail is required? There's a nice balance. Who here likes to answer 20-page surveys? No. Oh, okay. So you don't want to add so much detail because then no one's going to answer your survey, even if it's electronic and you have some nice things going on. But you want to have the level of detail that your research question requires. Second problem. Okay, again, how will it be used? Are you going to want to disseminate these results to certain people? Are you going to keep those and you're going to tease them out into certain sections, use them for different things? Okay, how easy is it for people to do the survey? All right, again, this is where think of your audience comes in. It might match your research question, but if you've set it up as an online survey and the audience does not use online resources, okay, you've just made it an ineffective tool. Okay. And then how often are you going to give the survey? And does every question that you've put into that survey need to be repeated if it's going to be used more than once? That's the design stuff, right? Okay. Here's another example, and again, I'm pushing survey research. So no limitations here. What can you get from survey research? Well, you can get your typical descriptive research. You're describing, we want to describe what is going on with a particular phenomenon. We've been talking in the last 3 presentations, qualitative and quantitative, and how they're combined together. We're in that early stage where not a lot is going on in the field, and we're trying to learn more. Okay? So this descriptive research, it's important for surveys to be able to do that. And we're going to mix up, we're going to talk about particular items that will help us get to that. We also might want to develop a measurement, right, for a particular, and you see depression, quality of life. Okay? Causal explanation. Now, I see some students, we always tell you all, do not say one thing causes another, right? Analyses, you do not want to put causality in your articles, that terminology. But we're getting close, we can get close to that, just as close as anything else with survey research, in my opinion. So you can measure associations and how strong that association and what direction that association is with survey research responses. Okay? Program evaluation. You can do that through a survey. And prediction. You can run regressions, and you can look at what factors predict a particular outcome. All of those analyses that we all know and love and have that flow chart, regressions, ANOVAs, any of those SEM models can be done from survey research. So we're not limited with that. And here's our politics again, right? So prediction models. We constantly, what do we think will happen in this election? Well, West Virginia's going to go completely to Trump in this prediction. And what do they use to do that prediction? And what happens with these middle states? Okay? So it's being used, and again, in this politics example, on a regular basis. Okay? We're also not limited in our design. So we've already talked about this, so I'm going to go over this quickly. One-time assessment versus more than one, or longitudinal. So we can look at trends, we can look at cohorts, and we can look at panels. So whether it's two different samples that we're following, the same sample that we're following, whatever we want to do, we can do that. We can assess that outcome with surveys. Okay, so take-home point from this first section. They can be used to answer a variety of research questions, and survey research can be used in a number of different designs. All right, so hopefully you're buying in. Or maybe you all bought in and that's why you were here, so that's good. All right, so let's talk about then how do we use them and things to consider. So I'm going to go ahead and put these out. So we've said pay attention to your research questions. That's going to guide you. Pay attention to your audience. That's the second thing. These are other things. So respondent attitudes. All right, now this one's hard. This one's hard to get at. But think about your reactions to a survey. All right? You guys remember, and it hasn't been done that much lately, you guys remember that every time you sat down for dinner, that phone would ring when we all had landlines? Now cell phones have introduced an interesting workaround. And what was it? People selling stuff. People wanting to fill out, just want to ask you some questions about X, Y, and Z. Do you have a few minutes? Okay, we still have telemarketing companies, right? So it's still being done. But we got to think about the attitudes of people. We've had a couple of studies that had some calling procedures. And it's amazing. It's like you don't just stop with one phone call if you don't get a response. You go call in the morning, you call in the afternoon, you call in the evening because their work schedules could be all over the place. And you call about twice in each of those. So while we're trying to get the response rate, it might affect the attitude of our respondents. Okay? Nature of questions is the second type. So I mentioned that some of my work is adolescent risk behavior. And I'm talking to parents and I'm talking to the adolescents. Do you think with either one of them I should start off with, have you engaged in sexual activity in the past 30 days? You think that's smart? Maybe I'd get it. I don't know. But so no, you can include sensitive questions. And of course, we had all kinds of sensitive questions in that research. We didn't start off with it. And we're going to talk more about order. But sensitive questions, work them in later. Okay? And now, to the same effect, age can be a similar sensitive question to people. People don't, or financial. What's your family income? Turned off completely. Cost of all of this, okay? Do you go with mail? Do you go with internet? Do you call them? And how much cost is involved with each of these? And does that fit your budget? Do you provide an incentive? Because, yes, you have developed a 20-page survey. And what would that be? And I see, with IRB, how much is too much? And we're coercing them to fill out that 20-page survey versus how much is, I just asked you to fill out a 20-page survey, and I want to thank you for your time. Think about those things. Okay, ability of instrument to meet the needs of research question. We've talked about this. We want a measurable. We want some open-ended, though. Again, we're talking about discovery, descriptive. So we're going to mix this up a little bit. Okay. All right. So again, research question. You're going to hear this, so you're going to be sick of it. Research question. What are you measuring? What are you hoping to answer? What are the variables that are tied to that question? How should those variables be assessed? Because they can be assessed, and we're going to talk about this, in a number of ways. All right? Let's talk about that. So categorical data. Here's some examples. Generally, almost anything we do has some of these in there. Right? Gender, race, religion, food group, place of residence, all of these kinds of things. They're in categories. There's not a continuous flow to them. They don't build on one another. You put them in categories. Ordinal data. So these are rankings. You can have rankings in surveys, basketball teams, football. Interval data, continuous data. So height, It's going to go from 0 to whatever. Weight, 0 to whatever. Age, you get the gist, right? Now, types of data, what I always tell people, again, my opinion, is whenever you can use continuous data, do it. Because analytically, you can change this type of data to that type of data easy. You cannot change something that you've asked categories to a continuous. So categories, like gender, we can't change to a continuous, right? So some things aren't going to be moved. But where you can, incorporate continuous variables or interval data, where possible. We do that with height and weight, change it to BMI. We get BMI percentile, that's a continuous. Then we can change that to categories, overweight, obese. That gives you more options analytically. Okay. What goes into the survey? Kind of speaks to our 20-page survey. Just throw it in. Dissertations, theses, throw it in. Although, Elizabeth, you're really good at this, I must say. Not the adding too much, but keeping it simple. So I'll give you kudos. I'm bad at this. I was really bad when I started. It's like, oh my gosh, I may only get this one chance. I'm going to do it. The other thing that you might not be thinking about is if you have a team that you're working with and everyone's really excited, oh, let's do that. Oh, and that's associated with that too. Let's do that. And that might be, I read this paper. Let's put some things in there. And then it ends up really big, really long. So don't do this. Think of it in sections. And I didn't say this at first. If anyone has any questions or comments from your own experiences, please interrupt me. Let's make this a interactive session. Okay. So the way a question is worded and the response options affect your data. I could never get the wording right, but I remember in graduate school we were learning a personality test to give it, the MMPI, right? And one of those items, and it wasn't just one of them, so this is like a 200 and some item personality exam. And one of those items, basically it was saying something like, I have not hit my significant other in the past. Well, if you say yes, it's bad. If you say no, you could be saying, no, I haven't hit my significant spouse, but in that period of time, but I could have afterwards. So people were like, I really don't want to answer it, period. And it didn't have a not applicable response option or a don't know, which wouldn't fit in that one. So that's a poor example because I can't remember the exact wording, but it's an example of make sure all your response choices, any of the possible response choices are covered, okay? So you want open-ended questions, and it's good to throw one in. We're going to be talking about that. It's good to throw one of each of these in. I don't know about you, but I like variety, and when something switches my eyes, I'll pay close attention to it. So open-ended responses, closed responses, we're going to talk about these. Differential scales, agreement or rating scales, ranking scales, and checklists. All of these could be in a survey. And I would suggest using them. Okay, if you've used Qualtrics, SurveyMonkey, they all have these as options, formatting options. So do that. Don't stick with just multiple choice throughout. Okay. So open-ended, of course, people, you ask a question and people provide their responses. Now these are hard to analyze. These fit in our qualitative software and approaches. I say they're hard to analyze. They're not hard to analyze. They take longer. And sometimes people don't like to incorporate them in because they take longer. But they give us rich information. And sometimes people will do like a combo. So they'll have a multiple choice question. At the end, they'll say other with a write-in. Like just in case we didn't cover everything, what is it? Okay. All right. So exploratory, anything that we have no idea what we're trying to go deeper, we're trying to learn about it, open-ended is the way to go. Okay. But you want to think about the respondent. Again, you want to think about incorporating this to give that respondent a chance to say anything, to offer suggestions that you may not have known about. Okay? a lot of people, I'll give you another example. They'll start with a multiple choice, and they've come up with the responses from previous work, qualitative work. So they've got those. And then they'll put an other in there because really that exploratory work hasn't finished. And so in the next rendition of the survey, they might add a new category because so many people put something in that other that was similar to one another, that's a new category. That's a new response choice. Okay, advantages. We already talked about giving them more opportunities. Disadvantages. We've already talked about that. It takes a little bit longer to analyze. And it's also subjective judgments. When I'm looking at, when I ask you all to provide your statements, how you write that sentence has a bias, has your bias in it. And I need to be conscious in how I interpret what you wrote. I have a bias. So it adds a little bit more there. Okay. But some examples, describe the pain you experience with walking. Now we have a lot of pain surveys. That can be a Likert scale or can be an open-ended if you're first starting out. Okay. So closed responses, I use the term back and forth, multiple choice or closed items. Okay. You can have them ordered in a way that makes sense on a continuum, or you can have the Likert popping in, or you can have unordered. So sometimes people say, I don't want to order my responses because I want people to stay awake and pay attention to what's there. We're going to talk about with the Likert, if you try to order them, make sure it makes sense, that order makes sense to not just you, but the respondents. Okay. All right, so multiple choice, we see those all the time. That's the preferred. Now, I've written this in here. You're going to see some different rules of thumb with neutral and don't know. Sometimes I think it makes sense to have those in there. But whenever I can, I don't include them. Okay? And it's just going to depend on, again, what you're trying to get at. Some of the particularly sensitive questions, a neutral in a Likert, a neutral is an easy way out. Right? I could know what I would respond, but I'm going to put neutral because of the question. I want, as a researcher, I want them, they're like 3 on this side and 3 on this side in terms of strongly agree, strongly disagree. And I want to know, put a circle somewhere not neutral. Put them in one direction. Tell me what direction your attitude's in. So I kind of force that a little bit. But on like our medical history, don't know, of course, they may not know their medical history. So that makes sense. Or in some items, the don't know might be reasonable. But I don't use it all the time, and definitely not with attitudinal Likert scales. Okay, so they're quicker and easier. Tabulate analytically easier. They force options. Okay, so that's a disadvantage. You got to make sure if your responses aren't exhaustive, you're not going to get it. And you must be clear. Okay. I just lumped Likert scales, rankings, and checklists and gave a little bit of a description about what they were just so we're all on the same page. Okay, we've already talked about strongly agree, strongly disagree. So the multiple choice might be a Likert scale or it might be a different forced choice option. Checklists, we use those with medical conditions all the time, or what physical activity equipment you have in the house, or you could fill in the blank for when you use checklists. Knowledge scales are often in surveys, or true false, and then you add up the true false and it becomes a larger scale. So any of those can be used. The rankings, you can pick the top 2 of whatever that someone chooses and then connect that with other things they've mentioned in the survey. Okay. And I've already said this, so offer a variety. Where you can, mix it up. Do it. So here's some examples from our political survey. So have you ever gotten into an argument with your spouse or partner about the 2016 presidential election? This is a categorical item, right? Yes, no. And here are the actual results. I think they all think it's not going well. So thinking about the results of the presidential election this November, how important do you think it is for a losing candidate to publicly acknowledge the winner as a legitimate, that should be president, sorry, president of the country? Okay, so then we got a Likert. Very important. They did provide a no answer, but not many people took that option. Okay. For the next few questions, please think about your child or children who are under 18. How often, if at all, do you talk about the election with your children? Okay. You can see those. So most of the time, it's multiple choice or forced choice or categorical for these. All right. Here's an example of where we can get the order effects. Okay. And this amazed me. But this can happen in any type of order, right? So in this study, they were asking people, again, about sensitive political views, potentially. So legal agreements, they asked first. If they were in favor of legal agreements, legal unions, favor, they opposed, and they included a don't know. They did include that option. And then they asked them about gay marriage. That's the first order, okay? So you can see 37 were in favor of legal agreements. But when you ask that after gay marriage, 45. Okay? Significantly different? Yes. Yes. So the order of your items can have an effect. That's where we're going to talk about later, the process. You should be piloting these. These things should come up. You don't have to have a huge sample size like this, or like you would when you do it for real, but pilot it to see if any quirks like this come out. All right. And I'm going to, okay, we're good. So how do you decide which mode? All right, so mode is, now we have so many great options. Telephone, tablet, online. We have our telemarketers, so slightly different telephone option. We still have our paper pencil versions, right? So we have a lot. How do we decide? All right, so here's in order by survey research. Audience, audience, audience. Okay? So if I'm working with the geriatric population, although that's changing, our geriatric population, our baby boomers, our generation before our baby boomers, know these things. They utilize these, all types of those formats. So it's not going to be an issue. But the current 70 and older, 75 and older, if you're working with that audience, you're not going to give them a cell phone survey. You may not even do an online survey. You might use the paper, right? Sample characteristics, so anything else. We often run into the issue of rural, right? We don't quite know how many people in West Virginia could use the tablet, right, Dr. Haggerty? We might do with your research. But we struggle with that. It's an effective communication, but how many people have that access, right? Whether due to poverty, rurality, all those factors. Okay, so other sample characteristics. Single parents, 2 parents in the household. That makes a big difference in the mode. What's the question type? Okay. Pretty straightforward questions are, I'm not going to put an open-ended response to someone's survey in my phone. It'll take forever, right? If there are a lot of them. Response rates, we're going to talk about those here in a minute. Cost and time. Okay? We are getting to a point with you guys, does a red exclamation next to your email work anymore? Because you get them so often, right? You know, the little thing that you can tick. We used to do that with survey research. Like, this is really important. You need to pay attention to this. And now people get it so often. With clutter, the clutter box now, do people even get it? What things do we need to put in the subject line to keep them out of the clutter box? All these things go into it. Okay, face-to-face. Ooh, sorry. Okay, advantages. So highest rates. I'm making a connection with you. If I sat and I said, I have a 2-page survey, please fill this out. Not to be too coercive, but please fill this out. And you might feel that connection to me to fill it out, okay? Versus an email, you don't know me. It's the wording I've used is very business-like. You don't have to respond to me, okay? You don't have to respond to me here either. But the highest response rate comes with a face-to-face connection. We're human beings. We connect that way. So it does take longer time, but if you have complex questions that you need to kind of build along the way, face-to-face. Response quality. So people are going to give you back more information in a face-to-face. Okay? They take advantage of interviewer presence. They might ask you questions to clarify. If a question isn't clear to them, what do you mean by this? And you get that chance to clarify. You can get multi-method data collection. You can incorporate a couple of different things while they're there. Disadvantages. All of that is costly with time, finances, all of that. Their time to stay with you, longer data collection period, even one time point. You know, you're here for a good hour and a half. And then interviewer concerns. If someone asks me a question, that gives me an opportunity for bias. Whether I'm really trying hard not to bias, I might give them a little bit. In my explanation, I might give them some clue about how to respond. Okay. A lot of advantages of the telephone. Okay. Less expensive than face-to-face. You can contact all kinds of people. Now, cell phones mess this up a little bit. And I was one of the first ones to really want to get on that no-call list, you know, that we're not using phone books anymore. One of my first projects in graduate school, we'd go down to the courthouse, figure out what babies were born, their addresses were included there, and we'd use that to mail things, okay? Or to call, their phone numbers were in there. And now, you can get a list. It may not have everyone, but it's a huge list. Telemarketers get certain regions. You can pay for certain regions, cut up certain ways. So that's there. Shorter data collection period, okay? They still get your voice. They don't have a presence, personal presence, but they still get your voice. You can still have that control. They can still ask you questions, and better response rate than the mail. Again, because it's still a connection, okay? Biased. Again, some people by design do not want those calls, and maybe they're different, okay? You might get no response. Response rates for telephone are really bad. Questionnaire constraints. I mean, you can't change it up while you're on the phone, and to that extent, the face-to-face is like that. And difficult to, the sensitive questions. I probably would not want to ask that question that I mentioned, the how often does your adolescent engage and say, on the phone. Because what are they going to do? Click. Could. Like that's, especially if I didn't build that up. Why am I asking that question? What, you know, so that's the hope that you do, you build that up. Okay, mailing. We used to get many more of these, but they're still coming, right? Please watch your mail for this survey. Please fill this out. Psychology literature, there for a long time, we're looking at the incentives, the motivation. And you remember, you get some surveys that have a nickel in them? Like glue, a little glue stick to them? So, well, psychological studies tell us that if someone, even a penny or a nickel, if someone gives that to you, you feel compelled to do something for that person. Fill out that survey. Collect that membership. Okay? So marketing is really ahead of the game. And they do a lot of mail. Lower cost in general. Stamps cost less than long-distance calls. Smaller team of people can send those out. Accessible. Again, you can have a wide variety. We can do the whole state if we had the resources. Okay? You can still look up some of that information, addresses and such. Cooperation. If I don't, again, we've already talked about it. If I don't see you or hear you, and no interview data. Okay, and response rates are one of the worst. Okay. Survey research through mail, rule of thumb, you're doing really well if you get 30% response rate. Literature, scholarly publications, accept 30 plus up. So it's not, of course you want the highest response rate, but they know that this methodology is hard. Okay. Just quickly, because we're about out, here are some of the general, here are those variables and how mail, phone, and the face-to-face can shake out. And I can, this will be up there if people want to see it. I'm just for time, I'm going to push on. Web surveys are the biggest. SurveyMonkey, Qualtrics, okay, all of these advantages, lower cost, easy to use, send by email, send a personalized script, send a reminder at whatever time you want to, however many reminders you want to. They have a lot of built-in systems that are great. Disadvantages, whether they have an online access is the biggest one. Representative samples. So we still are trying to figure out if those who have online access are any different from those who do not. Okay. What might look great on your computer might come across decoded and messed up on someone else's, or might be spinning. And if you spin every time you progress to another page, you get frustrated. And we get back to the response attitudes, right? They're just going to click out. All right. And then we're almost finished. So how bias affects response? Of course, his response might be affected by their approach. Would you pay $2.99 for the toothpaste? We're going to waterboard you a little bit more if you do. In general, writing questions. Here's what you want to do. And these sound so easy. People often are like, yeah, yes. But I'm telling you, if you go out and you find a survey, I know you'll find one of these missing. So you want to be clear, simple and concise. Compound questions are very common. Like, am I answering the first section of that or the second section? Okay. Specific, possible to answer. My response choices don't match my question. Relevant to me, that gets at the attitude. Do not use negatives or double negatives. Avoid bias. And that's if you might use a little bit more adjectives than you would normally, okay, or directive adjectives for something. Response choices, avoid simple yes/no answers and attempt to measure intensity. That's that continuous. Mutually exclusive, this is a pet peeve of mine. Oh my gosh, you see this, do not do this. Okay, what if I was a 5? Which one would I circle? Okay, and I'm just going to pick one. But does that help you in your analyses? No, because the next person could have picked the other one. And it's exhaustive. We've talked about that. Make sure they're exhaustive. Okay, the last thing I don't want to, I have to show this off. Another political thing. So here, not all of these are our presidents. But they tend to match the qualities of our items that we want. So Napoleon wasn't our president, but he fit well with short as possible. Visually attractive, that's Hamilton, and since all the Hamilton craze. Readable, Thomas Jefferson. Uncluttered, John Adams developed the Library of Congress. So he's classy. Logical sections, clear spaces to mark answers. If it is an open-ended question, don't give me one line to do it. Proper amount of space to write. This is John Hancock. He needed a lot of space to write his signature. Okay. The 2 more slides. The last thing, this is the other thing that's often missing. You see, in the past 4 weeks, okay, it's wonderful that they included a time. If you don't have a time, that's not specific. If you want me to recall something, my behavior could have changed from, and I'm sure it had, 10 years ago to last year to last week. Okay, give me what you want. Tell me what you want, and I'll give that back to you. The other thing that people might do, and it might be theoretically appropriate, but bold it. Maybe I would say not bold that sentence, but bold the timeline. Because if one thing is in the past year, and then you switch it on them and say in the last 4 weeks, bold it. You're changing it on them, and you want them to know. Okay. Basically, take-home point from this, include instructions. Many people don't have instructions in their surveys. They just go straight to the items. Okay? Or they'll have the instructions at the beginning of the survey, and then they don't help with the flow into a new section. So you go from demographics to then family history to then, and there's no help in, okay, in this section, we're going to ask you questions about this, this, this. Please check all that apply. Many people forget that. Okay? If there's a purpose for that section, state it. Help them, help you. Okay? All right. These are things that are missed.